I'm Stephen Robinson, and welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. Joining me today is my good friend Jane Jones, an incredibly talented theater maker out in Seattle. She is the founder and founding artistic director of the Book It Repertory Theater. I had the distinct pleasure of working with Jane for a few years when I was on the board at Book It, and I learned so much from her, and I'm very excited to have her joining us and to chat a bit about basically the past 5 years in the change that Book It has undergone. Jane, once again, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, wonderful to be here.
You and Myra Platt, your partner at Book It, were about to move on from Book It at the sort of, I think, the end of your 30th season. And as you have said, the moment the world went topsy-turvy, March of 2020, you were working on what would have been your final production at Book It, and then everything closed, which, I was heartbroken. I can only imagine how that felt for you. Could you just tell us a little bit about what happened at that time and what your thoughts were?
Just to add, it wasn't meant to be Myra and I's final times at Book It. It was the transition was set that we would step down from administrative duties, and that we would always be connected artistically in some way or other with the company. It's just that we wouldn't be running a not-for-profit anymore. After 30 years, it was time to give that helm to somebody else. But in the meantime, I was working on David Wroblewski's adaptation of the story of Edgar Sawtelle, and we were about 5 or 6 days away from going into the rehearsal room. The cast was gathered. We'd gone through, I think at that point, we'd already gone through probably 2 years of working on the adaptation. We were on our 7th draft, and music had been composed, sets had been designed, costumes were being contemplated, and of course, March 13th hit 2020, and the world went topsy-turvy. So that was the last time I was in a room of people with Book It members, Book It people, Book It artists, because everybody, hunkered down and started isolating and trying to figure out how to live. In the meantime, we had the board of directors had brought on a new artistic director for us to hand the helm over to. And so that was an unfortunate, that was a rough beginning for this person, a very rough beginning, and not a great opportunity for him to really, he was not a Seattle resident at the time. And so it was very difficult for him to get into the heartbeat of the city and get to know people and do that whole thing where, you just get to figure out the zeitgeist of the art scene, the cultural scene in general, and particularly the theater. So we wound up Zooming. I wasn't really going to step down until the end of August after we opened the Sawtelle in June, and then allowed him to have an experience of going through a whole adaptation process and opening a play and just kind of learning the tricks of our trade that we had established over all those years, just how to do a world premiere and make sure that the work always had a chance to succeed, that we were always giving it that kind of time and that kind of license. But anyway, we wound up not doing that. And we spent the next April, May, June, July, August, we spent the next 5 months on Zoom trying to figure out what would happen to Book It. How could Book It continue in some way when, of course, there could be no live performances? So that was interesting. you know. And so around then it was decided that radio drama could be, things could be adapted, and then that did proceed for a couple of years. Book It did radio drama, and by being able to put people in pods and record them, not in the room with other people. It was an interesting transition, of course. And as we all know, that all live performance took big hits during that time. And so that was hard, of course, for a new leader to come in and have to figure that out. And it was difficult for the board. The board didn't quite know how to manage that, but everybody did the best they could. And then eventually in 2023, live performance started up again. Book It started up again, but I think there was just there'd been no earned income for several years. And of course, it was hard to fundraise without any product. I mean, this was not a unique story for Book It, but it was just that perfect storm of founder syndrome, new leadership, COVID, and eventually in 2023, the board decided to sundown the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was rough. But at that time, Myra and I asked the board, please, to not extinguish the 501c3 not-for-profit status, the business language, the business license, hold on to all the website and all of the shared files so that we still had a hold. And we told the board in 2023 that whatever they needed to do should be done. And when the time came, we would take back the 501c3, which is what we've spent this last year doing. And we then just produced our first production, which luckily for me was finally, after 5 years, the story of Edgar Sawtelle. All I knew was that I've always said, there's the phrase community theater or the entity of community theater. And I have always felt like that's one of the greatest things that could ever happen to an organization, is that the art is supported by, created by, and successful through community. I mean, it's kind of like communion. And I have always felt that Book It wouldn't have been Book It when I founded Book It in New York City in 1986, and then moved in 1987 to Seattle. I brought the idea of Book It with me. And it was through the community that I met and became familiar with that I decided to get Book It going in Seattle. And that was 1988 by the time that happened. And then it was 1990 when we got our 501c3. So everything that happened with Book It from 1990 on was created because of Seattle. We just started hanging out our shingle and creating and working on the style and the art and bringing artists into the fold. And so that's the reason we survived for 30 years and basically became institutionalized. And that was a wonderful thing. So even though Book It closed down in the manner in which it had known itself to be, and the community knew Book It, it didn't mean that the art form or the community would no longer support the whole effect of Book It. And so that's what I felt like at the time. We will just go back to the community again. And that's pretty much what happened, is that we decided in June of 2024, after the outgoing board did a marvelous thing. They spent an entire year taking care of all of Book It's debt. And they raised a lot of money to do that. And they went to the community, and the community showed up to do that. And so when all the debt was paid, then they said, okay, here's the 501c3, here's the business license, here's the website, and here's about $18,000 in the bank. Take it away.
And when we talk about what you created and then built with Myra in particular, it is its own unique art form, beyond simply adapting books to the stage, because a lot of companies do that. Do you mind speaking a bit about the unique Book It style, and also how Book It in itself sort of is connected to your own relationship with literature, because that story I've always found very compelling.
So the way the Book It idea came about, the Book It style, I was living in New York City and working as an actress, and it seemed like this was the 80s. And I'm totally dating myself, but that was a very interesting time in playwriting in the United States of America. I mean, it just felt like, Angels in America. I mean, these epic pieces of theater were being created. And then at the same time, you had like a Christopher Durang, who yes. So there was this interesting confluence of the AIDS epidemic, of course, which was on everybody's mind and coming through in so many pieces. And then, of course, there was this new kind of nasal gazing, where just about every play you went to, there was a psychiatrist couch on stage. And so it was this wonderful confluence of where are we going? We're going into the millennium. We're heading into the year 2000. And what are the stories that are going to be told? Well, one of the things that was happening at this time as well was the advent of computers. Technology was just becoming so interesting. It was just, and what started happening was that Broadway was able to embrace that and start to just do these magnificent productions with so much just excitement and technology. And for me, as I was watching that happen, I started feeling like I was being bombarded with special effects and things, and that the essence of the spoken word was being lost in some way. My whole life, I had a very difficult time reading, and I never really understood what was wrong. I was a studious student from the time I was in the first grade. I would work hard on things. So I wound up being a good speller because I worked really hard on learning the words and things. But then an event happened where my parents moved. My father, Jimmy Jones, and his wife, Nancy, decided to gather their brood of 5 kids And my father moved us to Cheongju, Korea when I was 7, 8, and 9 years old. And this was Cheongju is a very big town now. But at the time it was third world. There was only dirt roads. There were no real vehicles, but also there was no school and there were no teachers. So my mother and another mother, my father was a civil engineer and they were building a plant there. They decided they had to become our teachers. And of course, neither one of them knew anything about teaching. And they were teaching from like first grade through middle school. So basically what wound up happening, we would not have very much school, but we had a lot of time to play on mountains and do all this wonderful stuff. Well, my mother skipped phonetics when I was in the third grade. And had I been in school in America during that time, it might have been recognized, but probably not so, because this would have been the early 60s, that I'm dyslexic. And they didn't really have a means of calling that out back then. But I think somebody probably would have figured out that I was having a difficult time once we got out of monosyllabic into polysyllabic words. So anyway, that went unnoticed. And I went through high school and through college and then into conservatory training. But in the meantime, I could memorize things, but just reading out loud was very difficult for me.
Mhm.
So fast forward about, I don't know, into the mid 80s. And I would take off with the fella that I was going steady with at the time, my sweetheart. And we were big rock climbers, and we would drive all over the United States in the summertime and go rock climbing. And we were taking this trip, and it just got the 3,000 miles back and forth and reading in the car, not read, just doing, what are we doing in the car? And finally, this one summer, I just said, you know what? I'm going to read out loud in the car. And so I took 2 books with us. I took The Grapes of Wrath and A Tale of Two Cities. Well, you can imagine the polysyllabic words in A Tale of Two Cities, right? Anyway, I'm reading and I'm just determined to figure out why reading is so difficult for me. And as we're reading on, John, my good friend to this day, he would say, Jane, stop, wait, stop. Go back and read that sentence again. And I would go back and read it. And we had both realized I'd read it word for word backwards.
Oh, wow.
And that had happened to me a couple of times on stage. In plays, I had done a little bit of that. So I knew it wasn't completely unfamiliar to me. But what was decided there that summer, we realized that because now it's the 80s and they're much more aware of these kinds of learning challenges. And so that summer, I learned I was dyslexic. And it was like the world just opened up for me. I was like, oh God, I'm not stupid. I just have this thing. And of course, dyslexia deals with, audio as well as visual learning. And it's how do you put the two together, And so then I started working with coaches. And one of the things that I realized as we were reading was that these amazing scenes were in literature. They were already written. And we had been New York City actors just waiting for the next great play to come along that could move the world. And I just thought, there's a play just about in every piece of literature ever written. And if we just use the narrative voice and let the narrative voice build the scenes, as opposed to technology needing to guide the audiences, then we as artists, it's what Shakespeare did. Shakespeare didn't have big sets. He just had great language, you know? And so that's where we started in New York. We started with adapting the literature, and we started using the narrative voice dialectically. And that meant that instead of just saying the hills were like white elephants, which is the opening line of Ernest Hemingway short story called The Hills Are Like White Elephants. And so you take that between two people sitting on stage, and you infuse the narrative with a girl who's, from that story, a young girl who is being taken by her lover somewhere in an arid country. I don't know that it's ever said, but she's about to have an abortion. And so if you put that as the young woman's first line, it could be trying to break the silence. Do you agree? The hills are like white elephants. Or he could say it in a grand gesture like, the hills are like white elephants. I mean, there's so many different ways, points of view that you can do it. And I don't know that was the greatest example, but Kurt Vonnegut, Long Walk to Each Other, Long Walk to Forever. Two actors, they had grown up next door to each other, and then they start to share the lines through fields. One of them would say orchards, through fields and woods and orchards, and near a lovely school that was a school for the blind, a bell tower. It's hard to, I'm just doing the worst job here.
But no, it's so fascinating to see that, because I had the pleasure of kind of working with you when it was just already the book style, right? And you sort of see
when
it
all
and
came
together, and it's just so fascinating to see how you got there, because it does.
Yeah,
it should seem strange, but it doesn't once you guys are
for
doing
instance, in Long Walk, one of them would say they were older now, and to like conversation, and the other one would say, and hadn't seen each other in nearly a year, but there'd always been a playful, and one would say comfortable, love between them. No, there'd also be a playful, comfortable warmth between them, but never any talk of love. And as soon as you say love, the two of them are on pins and needles, because what's about to happen, of course, is there will be a talk of love, and it was something that they would have never acknowledged, and now they were adults. And so Stephen, I'm not doing a good job with this, but it's just really hard to explain. Jane said,
it really does. It really should be seen. And that was one of the concern, I think challenges I'd imagine when they went to the radio play, because it's sort of seeing the actors perform it, and I would, how the gestures. Again, whenever I've had the pleasure of seeing you direct, it feels like choreography as well, like you're teaching like dance and movement. I mean, that's some of your background as well, I think, but it's very much of like, here's how you come into this room, here's how you say this and deliver it. It really is visual and auditory, kind of going back to your own experience with dyslexia. It's interesting.
I I will take that as a compliment. I think one of the reasons that you know, my dyslexia was not as prominent as it could have been was because I spent all my time in ballet as a child. So I wasn't doing AP classes or things, you know. I was just getting through school so that I could be a ballet dancer. And then I, of course, figured out eventually. Well, actually, I was living in London when I really went deep into ballet because I got into the Royal Academy of Ballet.
Wow.
Um, well, you know, as a dance student, and that's all I wanted to do. So I didn't have to do too much to get through school. All I had to do is do my homework, and then I could get to my dance lessons. And but one of the things that wound up happening, Miss Kipps said to me one day as we were in class, and oh, I loved it so much. And she just said, I was so thrilled to dance to the music and just so thrilled. And she said, Jane, you have such a good time from your neck up. And what she was
um,
basically telling me was, you're just not a good enough dancer, you know, to be anything other than corps de ballet. That's basically what she was letting me know. And I was actually thrilled because I thought, yeah, this is really, this is, yes, I love it. I love dancing, but I was going to the West End at night and I saw Hermione Gingold play Lady Bracknell in you know, the importance of being earnest. And she was in what? Oh my God, she was in her 70s and she could still speak. I mean, and I just looked at that and I thought, that's what I want to be doing. I want to be doing this. You know, a career in ballet, unless you're really, really sharp and talented and have great gifts, you're lucky if it lasts until your mid 30s.
mhm.
You know.
Yes,
And so
very
I was
demanding.
aware of the fact that I didn't want to just dance for a bit of time, and especially if I was never going to have anything other than core work, you know. So Miss Kipps gave me a great gift that day. Just a great gift. It was just such a relief. You know?
um,
Ah,
and when you're at Book that was, you guys were doing like world premieres, like five a season a year, which
yeah,
always blew my mind because that's so
yeah.
much work to adapt, to find these books, to adapt them. Uh, that's obviously changed. You have a bit more time with the work, I would imagine. Could you kind of speak to kind of
You mean where we
what
are now? What our vision
where
is?
you are now and what your vision is?
Well, what we have decided, we have a very small board now. It's just 9 of us, and most everybody on the board has had, well, everybody on the board has had some association with Book It at some time or other, whether
Mhm.
it was administration or artistic or or just being a long time subscriber for like
Mhm.
20 years. So, but what we've decided is just that what happened, and it's happened to a lot of organizations. I mean, we're seeing a great collaboration effort happening now, like with Seattle Shakespeare Festival in Seattle and a contemporary theater, that people are sharing venues, they're sharing overhead, they're sharing staff because the heartache and the challenge of keeping all that overhead going has can often rob a company of its ability to be very creative.
Mhm.
So what we decided in 2024, when we decided to take over the take back the 501c3 is that we would experiment, and our motto would be Book It is back one show at a time. And so we recognize that it would be impossible. I do believe that for real. It would be impossible for us to ever go back to what we had, and which, we had 15 full-time employees that all had health care, and we were doing 5 world premiere adaptations a year. We had a educational outreach program that in its heyday 20 years ago, we're reaching almost 150,000 kids a year. And the last time before we closed was still reaching about 30 or 50,000 kids a year. And those numbers of adaptations were in the many hundreds over the years. So we just know that we're not going to rebuild that. Doesn't speak to what we do best. And I really think what we do best, even though I think we were pretty good employers, and I think we served our community really well. You were on a board. When you were on our board, it was an 18-member board.
Yeah.
Maybe even more, maybe 20 plus. So, but the thing is that it just became so hard to that combo of earned income and raised income. It just, and things got so expensive, and Seattle became so expensive, and just keeping up with the needs of paying a staff who have children and they need their health care. And I mean, it became very, very difficult. And then some other things happened at the same time, which I think was ubiquitous all over, and just not, you didn't hear a lot about it, but the advent of home theaters, and how many channels can you own that you can have home entertainment, and how many things you can actually call up from your home at night.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, just that kind of home entertainment became available. And then of course, again, the world turned topsy-turvy. People got used to being home. And there's still people there are a lot of people who are still not that comfortable going and sitting in a live audience, So
Absolutely.
And so what we decided to do was, we decided, Kevin and I and Devora, all 3 of us are board members, that we would take Sawtell, which Charlotte Tinkin had graciously allowed us to world premiere back on Vashon Island in 2024. And Charlotte had been our managing director for 10 years. And she was so sad about Book It leaving that she said, I will produce, did kind of a co-production with Vashon Rep. And so we were able to do it on Vashon, and we had enough people, enough Book It constituents of Book It came to Vashon, and we were given such a thumbs up on the production that we felt like the production itself was lower risk than had it never been seen. You know how that goes. Mm-hmm. And so what we decided to do, we voted that Book It would produce Sawtell if we could raise every penny that it took to produce it before. So that's what we did. We put together a budget, and it was, everybody was paid well. All the artists, we weren't, scrimping on trying to, we wanted the artists to be paid beautifully, and they were. And we wanted our production values to still be simple and sensitive. But we put together that budget and we said, okay, and if we cannot raise this money, and I mean going out to the community and just seeing who would be willing to, basically be the angels, who was willing to write a $25,000 check or a $10,000 check or a $5,000 check or a $2,500 check or a $1,000 check, or even to the end, which I loved, we did a crowdsourcing, and people actually sent us $5. It was amazing, So what we decided to do is, if we could not raise that money by July 1st, 2025, we would not do the production. But luckily, we raised it all but the very last bit, because we wanted to save that for the community with the crowdsourcing. So we raised everything but $15,000 by July 1st, and it was marvelous. And so we knew, so everything then was whatever we sold ticket sales just went in our bank. We didn't owe it to anybody. So that's how we're going to look at moving forward with the future, is that we will raise the money to do the productions, and we will do one show a year. And if Sawtelle was any, if Sawtelle told us anything, it did tell us that there are people in the community who are still very, very willing and enthusiastic about helping this happen or making this happen. So that's where we're going. And I think, Pat Graney Dance Company, I think about the companies that do this, the Seagull Project in Seattle, and there are other organizations that do this, and they do it by very, very keen fundraising plans. And then we will, that'll be, and maybe something else, maybe something will creep in where we might be able to do 2 shows a year, but we're not going back to those tough days, having so much overhead and staff, not that we don't want staff. We need staff, as it turns out. It was really hard producing the whole show.
There's a lot, I can imagine.
It was a lot. It was a lot. We didn't even have a bank account or a PO box. So, but now we have a lot of systems that have moved, have moved forward. And I think the lift will be much easier next time. Plus, we have some money in the bank because we made some earned income.
And in your vision, will the runs be longer? So when you said a year, like it's like a couple months or as long as there's interest, like how do you see that playing out?
You mean how many performances we do?
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. It's something that we're paying a lot of attention to. It costs money to reserve the venue that we use, Broadway Performance Hall. Of course, the longer we're in residence there, the more money that costs. But one of the things that we're seeing, a lot of companies are not doing near as many performances. So I think that speaks to audience attrition.
Yeah.
But there are things that we can do, because we had plenty of seats at the Broadway Performance Hall. We just had a hard time figuring out the marketing and figuring out how to get people there. Word of mouth is always probably the best marketing you can possibly have. And if you don't run it long enough, you don't get that good word of mouth going.
Yeah, that's the big dilemma. And especially, folks in kind of my demo who have kids, and my wife is traveling for work or something. It's like, oh, we've heard about, unless you've already committed to a place for a season, you've already put it on your calendar. It's like, oh, I've heard about this. Oh, but I've got something next weekend, and then my kid has this next weekend. okay, now it's
Yeah.
closed, you know, and it's very
And
hard
especially
to
if
do it.
you, yeah, especially you guys with kids.
Something I've noticed, press has always existed, but people really they like immersive theater in the sense of feeling like they're part of something. And immersive can mean different things. It has sort of specific meanings in theater, but I know the sense of being part of a community. So it's immersive in which I'm going to go and everyone's laughing, right? Because,
Yeah,
you know, if I'm watching
yeah,
at home, it's different. If I'm seeing something funny, everyone's laughing, or if I'm sharing a feeling. And I think to me, one of the drawbacks, I know people interpret it differently, of like, oh, well, because people watch so much at home, they're terrible in an audience and they're rude and they're so forth. And it's like, well, Shakespeare's audiences are pretty rowdy. I think that we've gotten perhaps
yeah,
a sense of like, I mean, yes, if I watch something alone, I control it completely and no one's making any noise, but it's
yeah,
nice to be part of that shared experience as much as possible. And you know, that the work I do, I try to do as much of like, how can we find ways to get people more feeling like this is the shared experience and that
yeah,
feeling.
yeah.
And Sawtell definitely did that in the sense of, you know, you sort of do feel an audience when there's a mystery or when people
Oh,
are in
yeah.
date. Like there's just people are on there, and that's the coolest thing in the world for me. So I
Well, that's
really
why
enjoy
live,
it.
I mean, live theater is live. Live anything is pretty great, you know, but
Mhm.
live theater definitely gives the audience a chance to breathe together. You know, I have been in audiences before where I have just felt everybody holding their breath and then taking a collective breath together, you know, and that is just so amazing when it happens, you know, on the edge of your seat kind of thing, or you're laughing so hard, you know, when that happens, when an audience just starts laughing together, it's infectious. You know, you just feel so good to be experiencing that together. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. Yeah, it's
Uh,
really great. I find my passion for it just as alive as it always ever was. And and I've been out of town. I've been out of state, actually gone to the East Coast to direct a couple of things over the last couple of years, working with a colleague of mine from American Conservatory Theater long time ago. And and I haven't been doing book it stuff. I've been, you know, just working on plays, and I still find it. I didn't know if I was going to enjoy doing a straight play, you know, but I I still I find it just being in a room, creating, making art together, making the spoken word, you know, creating opportunities for people to be in a room together and have experiences together. It's thrilling. I love the
it,
rehearsal room. I just love it.
yeah. Well, you're great at that
Thank you.
process of it, of leading it, and no, I'm so glad. You know what had happened with Book It. Was a shame. So many theaters had gone on. You know, it was a tough period, and this. I'm just glad that Book It's back in your guys' hands, and you're seeing how to make it work in sort of this new landscape.
Yeah.
And
It's a
so,
whole new paradigm, and we'll just see what happens.
and speaking somewhat of immersive, this is a story I have to tell you because um, I, you, of course, were in a key, um, a major first episode of Twin Peaks, major part of my own life, and
Yes.
this story. So my wife and I, back in 2008, were traveling. We're in Norway. We landed Oslo late at night because we got delayed. They'd given our room away, and we're like, don't know where to stay. Somehow someone takes pity on us. They find us a room someplace that's not particularly, it's kind of sketchy, it's dark, and we're like really uncomfortable. And we're switching the channels. The only show on that was in English was the pilot of Twin Peaks. So I had not met you yet, but you were keeping us safe in that academy. So it's like, oh, it's
I love that. I love that. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, that was that one goes down for me as such a memorable moment in my career, to be, and nobody knew what it was going to be. I mean, nobody got to read the whole script. I mean, the whole thing. Plus, David Lynch hadn't figured out what he was going to do yet either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I loved being directed by him. Oh, it was just so great. And he did this thing as we're getting ready, you know, everybody's in the classroom. I played the teacher, and right before he says, he's got the whole thing set up, and right before he says action, he comes up to me, Stephen, and he whispers in my ear, "You have a secret."
That's just wonderful direction. Yeah.
I was like, okay, I have a secret. And so then we do the scene, and he yells cut, and of course nobody knows who killed Laura Palmer. You know, the makeup woman comes up and fixes me, and she looks at me, she says, "Did you do it?"
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I can't say, can I?" It's like,
exactly. That's your secret.
Oh my God! But I suspect he did that with everybody. I suspect he did that with everybody. That he went, and I suspect he whispered in everybody's ear, "You have a secret." And I think that's why we were all just so on edge. Nobody could trust each other. I mean, it was so great. But I've done that a couple of times as a director. I've used it when I just didn't feel like actors were able to, like, just kind of drop in.
Exactly.
You know? And I just go, "And by the way, you know, you have a secret." And so that it's just this sense of, oh, thank God I don't know what I'm doing, because now I can just play, I have a secret. You know. So anyway, yeah, that was a great day. I remember just about everything about it, you know.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And thank you again for taking the time to chat with me and for us to sort of catch up. And for folks listening and watching, if they want to help the next Crowdsource, where can they find you, or when that's going to happen, or sort of?
That's great. Probably the Book It website. I mean, we don't have a Crowdsource like active right now, but we do have a donation button on
there you go.
book-it.org. So, great. You know, I mean, really and truly, $5, $10. I mean, you know, you can go all the way up to 50,000. It doesn't matter. What's important is if you believe in the work, and you can support it in any way. And there's a thing on the website for volunteers. You know, I mean, thank you, Stephen, for being so supportive.
Oh, well, really you guys do great work, and I've always admired you and the work you and Kevin as well, who's a tremendous talent, and I am so glad that you guys are back at it, and I hope to see more of your stuff out there. So Jane Jones at Book It, still rocking. I'm so thrilled. So thanks everyone. Like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
Okay. Bye. Bye-bye.